Good morning to you all. My name is Eran Razin. I'm the director of the Institute of Urban and Regional Studies. That is the urban planning program at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I am glad to open this session on who owns the right to the city, perspectives of urban equality or inequality. A few words, I don't know if they are in place or out of place. By referring to the right to the city, we usually emphasize accessibility, the freedom for all to move safely throughout urban space, also in privatized spaces such as gated communities, waterfronts, etc., but also access to urban resources, to public services, to employment opportunities. We emphasize inclusiveness, housing, inclusive zoning, other aspects. We emphasize democracy, linked to the sort of elusive concept of urban citizenship. We will speak about it in this session. Does the right of the city imply equality, social justice? In the above mentioned aspects, of course, yes, but it may be complex. Realities are complex. They involve tensions and compromises between competing values and political interests. In urban planning classes, I just came from teaching from 8 in the morning, we preach for inclusionary zoning, but practically we demonstrate how to implement exclusionary zoning practices. Democracy and community autonomy do not always coexist in harmony with inclusiveness. As to equality, redistribution does not necessarily coexist with municipal autonomy. And with all respect, notions of urban citizenship depend so much on central state policies and actions that city can hardly influence. For example, if we deal with the acute challenge of homelessness in American cities, much of the discussion ignores the federal responsibility without this. Cities have limited options. Anyway, we have 3 stimulating presentations this session, and the first one by Professor Avner de Shalit. Avner de Shalit is the Max Kampelman Professor of Democracy and Human Rights at the Department of Political Science, the Hebrew University. He is the author of many books. The recent ones, The Spirit of Cities with Daniel Bell, Cities and Immigration, and the most recent forthcoming book, The City of Equals, forthcoming in Oxford University Press. And this is the title of your presentation. I assume you will speak about it. So, thanks.
Right. So, very good morning to you all, and I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for coming, and thank you for inviting me to talk about this topic, City of Equals, and as Eran said, it's based on a joint research with Joe Wolf. So the reason I start with this photograph from São Paulo, by the way, is that it captures in one photograph the essence of what I want to tell you. So you can look at it, and then we can go and have coffee. So you have material inequality here between the haves and the have-nots. But also, if you can look at it closely, you can see that there is a wall between the favela and the affluent neighborhood. And presumably those who sit in the afternoon in their private swimming pool don't watch the others, but turn a blind eye to the others, which was an expression that we were told time and again by people in different cities when we asked them, what is the essence of inequality in the city? They said, we turn a blind eye to each other. So I want to talk about relational equality or relational inequality rather than about material inequality. So that's the question. What is inequality in a city rather than in a state? Or what is equality in a city rather than in a state? And of course, there are 2 issues here. One is that the way you define a problem constitutes its solution. So if you define a problem in one way, you solved it in this way. If you define it in another way, you will probably solve it in another way. And the other issue is that who defines the problem is a key issue as well. And at the moment, those who define inequality in cities are only academics and mostly geographers and economists. And although they are very close friends, I think they haven't captured the entire situation. So what Joe and I started to do, is, what we aim to do, is to go and talk to people in various cities in the world and ask them how they perceive inequality, and see if we could theorize on the basis of talking with a lot of people in these cities. So at the moment, as I said, you have a lot of literature on this, mostly case studies, but also when you have theory, there is a very important contribution by geographers, which is about spatial issues and also about race relations. And there is another contribution by economists, and some of my best friends are economists, but I'm going to be very critical here, because the way they defined inequality in the city is based on the Gini coefficient, which is the way we define inequality or equality in the state. And the consequences are ridiculous, as I want to show. So forget about the mathematics of Gini coefficient. The point is that the Gini coefficient is sensitive to gaps in income or gaps in wealth, okay? So what you have, and the example I owe to one of my PhD students, Tal Alster, what you have is a situation whereby Rudy Giuliani, when he was mayor of New York, was tough on crime, which meant that he made life unbearable for the poor. And they left. And as a result, the Gini coefficient improved dramatically because of a very inegalitarian policy. Where did they all go to? Berkeley said, you can come here. We're a liberal city. You'll have soup kitchens. You'll have a lot of social workers to cater for your needs. So they went to Berkeley. Berkeley became 10th most inegalitarian city in the United States because of a very egalitarian policy. So to theorize about it, you could say that the Gini implies that a city can be very egalitarian when everybody is upper class and immigrants and lower class are not welcomed, which is, of course, ridiculous. The other thing that puzzled us was that when we started to talk with people about, people with an egalitarian spirit, people who think of themselves as people who think of as equal to others and as progressive and liberals and people who oppose discrimination, we asked them what is the most egalitarian city in your country? And we got these answers. We got Berkeley in America, Berlin in Germany, and Jerusalem in Israel. And these are not equal cities in material terms. They're very unequal in material terms. So the puzzle is, what do people think when they think about an equal city or a city of equals, okay? So what did we do? We did two things. We analyzed lots of policies issued by different cities, policies that were framed as policies that are meant to promote equality. And we also talked to 182 people around the globe in 10 cities in 6 countries. And we used a method which we call public reflective equilibrium. To put in a nutshell, what it means is that interviews are not meant to be analyzed statistically afterwards, but to serve as, so to speak, springboards from which you can jump and see things differently. So what we wanted is to be inspired by people and then theorize about this philosophically. So we interviewed people in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Rio de Janeiro, Berlin, Hamburg, Oxford, London, and New York City. And then we sat and analyzed all this data that we got. Okay, so we sat for 2 years and read all these interviews. And we thought that there were lots of issues that came time and again by all these people. And what was common to all of them was that they were all about relational equality. So I need to explain the term. Material equality is about who gets what and how much in financial terms or in money, okay? Whereas relational equality is about how we treat each other, how we see each other. Do we think about each other as equals, or are we snobs? or do we think that people are genuinely equal to each other? And all these issues like accessibility of public amenities, communication, eye contact between people, how do we treat the elderly, do we cater for the needs of young parents with children, they're all about how do we live together? What does it mean to be a community in a city, or what does it mean to be a city? And so what I'm saying is that it's not only who owns the city, it's who defines the city. Because people, city dwellers, think about equality in a city in a very different way than academics do. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go through the interviews very briefly and just give you samples, examples of the interviews to convince you that that indeed we were right in how we theorized about it. So here is an example of what we mean by relational equality. This is Jenny, she's 28 from Tel Aviv, and she says, equality is not merely about the service that the city offers, but about the concern and respect with which the city provides its services. And she gives a very interesting example. So there is a municipality service in Tel Aviv, and it is given in the south of Tel Aviv and in the north of Tel Aviv, and the queues, what happens in the waiting room is very different. In the north, you get water, you get coffee. In the south, they treat you like dogs. Okay, so we thought about all these interviews, and we thought that together we can derive 4 principles of equality from these interviews. The first one is that access to city services isn't constituted by the market. The second one is that people should have a sense of meaningful life. All of them should have it. The third is that the city should be diverse and there should be social mixing in the city. And the fourth is that there should be non-differential inclusion. And together, all these make the bottom line or the overall argument, which is that a city of equals is a city where people have a secure functioning of a sense of place. So now I'm going to go through the interviews and explain this. So first, non-market access to goods. So obviously, in a market-based society, your wealth constitutes your likelihood to enjoy life. But a city of equals should compensate for this. But a city of equals cannot compensate by offering you salaries because cities don't have budgets for this. Cities can do other things. Cities can organize street parties. Cities can organize outdoor festivals, outdoor concerts. Cities can have very good public gardens around the corners. They can have kindergartens which are next to your house rather than 3 or 4 miles from where you live, and so on and so forth. So the accessibility of services, accessibility both geographically, spatially, but also in terms of do they cost you or do they not cost you, of cafes, pubs, clinics, supermarkets, and by the way, in poor neighborhoods in many cities, you don't have supermarkets. So a city of equals should, for example, demand that if a chain opens a supermarket in an affluent neighborhood, they should also open a branch in a poor neighborhood. And cities can cater for your transportation like they do in Berlin or in Curitiba. But for example, if you think about São Paulo, a lot of people in São Paulo who are all also poor and live at the outskirts of the city have to commute 3 hours a day to work and 3 hours a day back from work. Now, just imagine what it makes, how it affects your life. If 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, you commute, okay? So does the city cater for this or does it not? Now, interestingly, when people talked about the availability and frequency and variety of transportation, they translated it to relational equality terms. For example, here's Arthur from Rio who said, you know, the fact that people from different backgrounds and classes do not mix implies that our city is a city of brutality. This is not about transportation. This is about how we treat each other, a city of brutality. I'll skip about this, but here is another thing. So transportation is part of communication. Think about the following. Wi-Fi is necessary now, right? There are very, very few, here's the list, cities in the world that supply absolutely, completely free Wi-Fi everywhere. Cities must do this. Also, people were talking about communication, as I said, using the metaphor of eye level. This is from Oxford. Look at, we are capitalist pigs, a woman says. We don't look people in their eyes, just run over there. And this expression was mentioned time and again. On the other hand, in Copenhagen, you have a regulation whereby if you open a restaurant or a cafe, you must not have a black glass or a mirror glass above 120 centimeters, and it is justified in the regulation so that people can have eye contact, those who sit inside and those who walk by outside. Here's another example of these non-market services, non-market-based services. The soup kitchen. So here's an example of a soup kitchen where you have to tip the waiter in one shekel. That's a third of $1. Okay, so it's symbolic, right? Well, yeah, it's symbolic, right? But it's meaningful because you are given the feeling that nobody's giving you a favor. You have to pay for your meal, even if it's symbolic and you know it's symbolic. But here is something extremely interesting, I thought, that we got from an interview in Hamburg. So there was a lady who said, you know, equality in the city, what is unequal about Hamburg is that my daughter works as a nurse, she works night shifts, and I have to babysit 4 times a week. Okay, what's she talking about? So many cities offer daycare, but a lot of cities depend on people who work during the nights, people who work in the bakery, people who clean up our streets. But nobody gives a damn about helping these people with their children. So why shouldn't the City of Equals offer night care or arrange babysitting for these people? Okay. The second principle, as I said, was a sense of meaningful life. I think it's very clear, like places of worship and living in surroundings which are interesting and being part of writing the local history. So for the purpose of lack of time, because of lack of time, I'll just skip this and go to the third principle, diversity and social mixing. So in a way, prima facie, it should look wrong, right? I mean, equality is about sameness, and here I'm talking about different people and variety of people. But in a way, what we mean is that a city should be a place where as many people as possible can feel in place. They can feel it's their home. So a city of diversity would be egalitarian. What else? A lot of people talked about how different people or how different groups experience the city, and they talked about gender, ethnicity, class, and so on. So a lot of women talked about the lack of public toilets in public spaces, right? I mean, and that's quite true. I mean, men unfortunately find solutions for this in the open space, but women tend not to do this. And whether it's cultural or whatever, that's an issue of inequality between women and men and how women experience the city. Here's another example, which is about ethnicity. So this was a male, secular, young Palestinian who said, you know, I like going to the pubs and we don't have them in East Jerusalem, so I go to West Jerusalem and everything is fine. They treat me nicely in the pub. But when I go out of the pub and it's midnight, I'm very likely to be stopped by the police. Okay? Whereas the Jews who were sitting next to me go home, they're not stopped by the police. So I experienced the city very differently, and I'll leave all this issue of the police to Neil because he'll talk about it, but this was mentioned time and again. How does the police treat us? Okay, here is another example from Rio. So Neusa was a homeless person we interviewed, and she lives with her granddaughter on the street, and she's continuously frightened, anxious about her granddaughter being kidnapped. So she says Rio is a very unsafe place. And Lenin, who was a professor of physics in one of the universities, said, you know what I like about Rio? That it's a safe place. Now, it's not that they are describing different subjective feelings, that they're describing different objective conditions because they live in different parts of the city. And in one place they have the police and everything and lights on the streets and so on, and in the other they don't have it. Gender equality is also a huge issue. We can discuss it more in the Q&A, but here are two examples. Unfortunately, it's usually only the women, or mostly the women, who go to pick up the children from school or the kindergarten. And in some cities, they cater for their needs, like putting benches next to the schools. And in some cities, they don't. Another issue is an example from Vienna. They found out that women use the public space for jogging, public parks, for jogging, but they don't play with balls, unlike the boys or men who play football. So they put a lot of volleyball nets in the parks, and all of a sudden you have a lot of women using the parks. And there are other examples, I'll skip them too. Age, the elderly. So here's Carl from Rotterdam who says, you know, and he's referring to Richard Florida's thesis. You know, they wanted us artists, creative people, to come here so that Rotterdam becomes richer and more affluent, and yuppies and start coming to live in Rotterdam. And that was fine. This attracted me to Rotterdam, and I came. Now I'm 68 years old, and I cannot afford the rent because we artists, we don't earn a lot. And the rent is now very high. So what does the city do? Nothing. So here's an argument. Cities should cater for the elderly in this respect as well. This relates also to inclusivity, and here is an example from Amsterdam. So Ruben is from East Holland, and I'm not Dutch, but he told me that the accent is very different. And the moment he opens his mouth, they realize that he's from East Holland, and East Holland, they are not as good as us Amsterdammers. So he says that language becomes harder, that you have to, that you have to jump over in order to feel that you're included in the city. Non-differential inclusion is therefore the fourth and last argument about which I'll talk. So the idea is that people should have access to facilities and resources of the city by way of automatically assumed entitlement, rather than by having to throw themselves at the mercy of gatekeepers, okay? And this has formal aspects and informal aspects. So here's an example for a formal aspect. Queues to services like public housing. A lot of cities offer you public housing, and that's great. But you have to know somebody in the local municipality, and you have to have a cousin who works there and so on, and you have to be Jewish rather than Palestinian, or white rather than black, in order to get it faster. And that's wrong, of course, right? I mean, if we are talking about equality, this should not be the case. But there are also issues of informal queues, like you're standing in the bar and you want to order a drink, and your mate is waiting there at the table, and she or he wants the drink urgently, but you have to wait longer because of the color of your skin, or because they see that you're an immigrant, and so on and so forth. So of course this is wrong. But also the idea is that you should feel that you are yourself in the public domain, and that you can be free to be yourself. So this, of course, was told to us many times by gays and lesbians and so on. So you have to be accepted without having to apologize, and you have to be accepted and not merely tolerated. So as I said, gays said this time and again. One of them said, I want to be proud of my city, and I want the city to be proud of people like me, which I thought was a beautiful sentence of a city of equals. And then the last example is from the Hebrew University. So this was given to me I was told this by an Arab female student. She said, you don't treat Arab students equally. And I said, well, yes, we do. You can take your exams in Arabic. And she said, listen, you professor, we are 20% of this university and we are 40% of this city. You shouldn't give me a favor and let me take the exam in Arabic. You should have courses in Arabic. I thought, oh my God, she's bloody right. And I think that the way communities use the majority's language is also an issue about equality. So from all this, we think that all these principles, and that's my last word, constitute what we would like to say, that people should have a secure sense of place. And I guess you all understand what a secure sense of place. Of course, there might be possible tensions here. We can talk about this in the Q&A, but my time is over, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a fascinating talk. By the way, your opening slide from Brazil, it's also the cover of our 2017 book, again on inequality and governance in the metropolis, but dealing mainly with fiscal aspects. So this is one comment. It was nice, your comparison between Giuliani's New York and Berkeley, San Francisco. It's so correct. It's, I didn't think about it, but, and I know well, not only New York, but my daughter is from Berkeley, and I know what you mean about inequality in Berkeley and the issue of homelessness. It's not only Berkeley, it's in San Francisco. It's a huge challenge. Again, an egalitarian city, which is one of the most unequal places with the criticism that comes. Again, there is your point of view. There are others like Michael Schellenberg, San Francisco, which called it San Francisco, which the subtitle is How Progressive Ruin the Cities. But you come with the goodwill. And again, these are again the challenges that maybe others will refer to. So I open the floor for questions. Yes, please.
So thank you so much, Avner, for your wonderful presentation. I think I will follow a little bit on what Eran might have suggested, which is the economic theory of what is unique about the city, and you yourself demonstrated it through the exit or the easier exit strategies that various populations can perform. So what is unique about cities and inequality is, at least according to economic theory, the inability of cities to really deal with inequality. Because what will happen is that the rich populations will immediately migrate out, and in order to prevent that, you have various bribe systems that the city will adopt to bribe them to stay in. So they will let their kids register in segregated schools, they will give their neighborhoods better, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, so, and you kind of in one of your slides, you dealt with it, but I'm wondering, or at least you mentioned it, how is your beautiful utopic vision, which we all share, I think, or many of us, really deal with the basic problem of the easy exit or easier exit, if you compare them to states, and this is why states are better at redistribution than cities. So isn't that some kind of a basic thing that you would need to calculate into your theory of how cities would deal with equality or inequality?
So thank you. I love the project. I was wondering why your starting point was economic theory, because there are so many other theories of equality that you actually address, right? Like social inclusion and distributive justice. So is it really that cities think only through economic theories on equality today? I'm not sure about that. So that's the first question. I was wondering, it follows a bit on Ishai's point, what should be the relationship between the state and the city in addressing these issues? Because you can't expect on so many levels and arguments that the city will be in charge of reaching distributive justice and inclusion, social inclusion. How do you see the relationship between these two entities in fulfilling these aims? And I think a main hurdle that remains within cities is the issue of economic inequality, that even if you provide a very basic, universal entitlement to services and access to services, performances in the park and playgrounds, etc., you'll still have a percentage of people who are holders of money that can purchase a lot of things privately, including going to the cinema and going to other art shows where they pay for, and having a privatized education and having private schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and by their education. So once you have economic inequality, can your vision even be fulfilled?
Maybe we'll take a third question before. Please.
Thanks. It continues the same point, and it's shy points, but from a different point of view. So I think that you have a basic assumption that cities are a place of diversity, and this is how cities should be. But of course, if we want cities to be equal cities, so it will be easier if everybody will be the same. And then maybe we have just like these contrasting values there that we need to decide on. And maybe it's for us to decide on what is more important for us, so the diversity, and then all the points that were already said will be in place. Or if we want equality, and then we will have to change this. And this, to me, relates so not to the necessarily to the city and state, but to the rivalry between cities, because we can have cities of equals, of the same people, but then the diversity will come from this relationship between cities and not in the same city.
So please, we had some three substantial questions, so short response.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much for very important questions. So I'll start with Ishai's. So yeah, it is unique. I mean, that's the issue with cities, right? That people can exit and that they can easily react to policies. So they can be attracted to cities. And, you know, my kids left Jerusalem and went to Tel Aviv because there are many more jobs there, unfortunately. And we can talk about this for ages. Anyway, yeah, I mean, we don't think that we have a solution for this. And this goes also to the next question about the relationships between the state and the city. I mean, the state is not going to wither away. It's going to be there, right? And the state has a very important function, also when it comes to equality, and especially when it comes to economic equality. So we decided to shed light on what's going on in the city, because everybody's talking about equality on the state level, and very few people are talking about equality or inequality in the city level. And we thought that there is an issue there, that cities can do quite a lot. Now, cities are very limited in their powers, and in a way, again, I'm answering to both your questions. They're very limited because they don't have these huge budgets that states have, although there are quite a number of cities that have bigger budgets than many other. Like New York has a bigger budget than I think 45 states in the United States. Or maybe I'm wrong about the number, but 30 something for sure. So there's a lot that cities can do which hasn't got a direct line, which are not intimately economic. Okay, they can compensate for in economic inequality. By this, I don't mean that I turn a blind eye to economic inequality. Obviously, you know, if the situation is, as you're saying, that private people, that people can buy things privately and lead much better life, that's wrong for me as an egalitarian. But that's an issue that the state has to deal with. Or the city can deal with it in very interesting, innovative ways, like offering street festivals or free concerts. I mean, in Israel, for example, we have sunshine 2/3 of the days, and we could offer lots of free concerts, and we don't. We charge for everything. Even our municipality that is doing much more, I think, than other municipalities in Israel is not doing enough in that sense. There are different models. We always say in Sweden, right? So in Sweden, most of your taxes are paid like middle-class bourgeois people like ourselves would pay taxes only to the local municipality. And then the local municipality has a lot of income and they can do a lot. But then there is the issue of inequality between cities, as Merav said. Because in Malmo, you have lots and lots of Arab immigrants at the moment. I think 1/3 of the population of Malmo is Arabic. So they don't have a lot of income because most of these people are unemployed. So what does the state do? The state taxes cities after cities tax residents, inhabitants, city dwellers, okay? So Stockholm is taxed by the state and money is transferred to Malmo so that Malmo can deal with all these immigrants. And that's a very interesting model. It's very different from all other countries in the world. Yeah. Suggested here, I don't know whether it will be, but it's on the table. They haven't decided, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I hope I answered most of. Yeah, I'll relate to Mirav second question later. Okay, let's take more questions.
Okay, we have a very short time, so short questions, short answers. Noga and you.
Thank you. Thanks, Avner. It was fascinating. I think that one of the examples that struck me was about Wi-Fi services, and thinking that 10 years ago we would consider that as a kind of a creative class approach of attracting youth. And I was wondering, and it made me think about the ways that ideas and policies that were considered more unequal, like trying to attract creative class, are now being considered as just city approach. And in general, the fact that the discourses of the just city became very strong and popular after Occupy Wall Street and writers like Piketty, but also figures like Richard Florida. So I was just wondering, what do you think about the rise of this kind of discourses and whether they, and in a way the transformation from a more unequal policy approach and the popularization of the more equal one?
Please, final question. Final, and that's it. And you will speak.
Okay. Thank you, Avner, for this wonderful presentation. I think it's a great idea to let people decide themselves what makes a city equal and not academics decide on it. But I wonder if you noticed any difference between how different peoples, for example, privileged and the less well-off ones, define equality.
Thank you for a fascinating presentation. Sort of related to that question, I was wondering how you decide. It's great to ask people and not academics, I agree. How did you decide which people to ask? And then whether the categories that you then showed us of gender, age were decided categories of the type of people you chose, and then that's what came up? Or there's surprising categories that you didn't anticipate in choosing a variety of people? And I also wanted to ask about if you could say something about, perhaps rather than the distinction between the relational and material, more the relationship between them. So for instance, are there certain relational issues that residents are raising that actually stem from material problems or can be solved through material conditions? So for instance, are women seen in the city? Maybe if we put lightings in the street so they feel safer to walk, it's a material solution to a relational.
So,
Thank you.
Quick replies. 2 minutes.
Oh my God. So, because I'm not going to do justice to all these questions, including the previous ones, I'll be very happy to continue discussing this during the break. So, and I do apologize. Just a very quick answer to the methodological questions. We interviewed, in fact, 500 or so people, and we used 182 interviews in the book because the other interviews never finished. So they were interrupted for various reasons, and we thought that it was not academically right to use them. And we just bumped into people and asked them arbitrarily. So we had to walk in places for a lot of days, and like I went to Amsterdam 4 times for a couple of days each time. You know, life is tough when you're an academic, and we just bump into people and ask them to. And because these interviews are very long, usually they're more than an hour, so you cannot do more than 8 or 10 a day. So we had to do it. And we also used research assistants who spoke the local language in Brazil and in Germany. It was arbitrary. And the reason, and we knew that we would have to interview immigrants and women and so on and so forth. And of course, we managed to do this because we went to different places and different neighborhoods in the cities and in different times of the day and night, including 5 a.m. So I did lots of interviews in New York in 5 a.m. Most of them were not successful because people were rushing to work. So I didn't finish the interview. But it was important for me to interview working class who are going at these hours to their work. The surprising issue is that different groups, different classes, different people from different cities did not define equality in the city differently. There was a lot in common. I showed the slides of all these issues that were mentioned time and again. And it was in Rio and in Amsterdam and in Rotterdam and so on, and in Jerusalem and so on. Of course, in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, people talked about equality between ethnic equality more than other, or national equality more than in other cities. But in generally speaking, it was very illuminating how things came time and again, were repeated in the interviews. The Wi-Fi services and the rise of these discourses, I think that's a huge issue, which, to be frank, I haven't thought about enough. So it's a good challenge, and I have to think about it more. How things that were thought to be kind of part of what is unequal about the city are becoming part of what is the equal city. It's a good way to conclude the book, I think. So thank you. And the last thing, all these non-material solutions, of course, they cost money. But the idea is that you don't think about money, about giving money to the poor, but you're thinking about giving services actually to everybody, but also to the poor. I'm not sure I answered, but I think Eran wants me to finish.
Thank you very much. I will refrain from another comment that I had because we are really short in time. And I would like to invite Anthony Remesar, Associate Professor at the University of Barcelona, Director of Police Research Center at the University of Barcelona, Coordinator of the Master in Urban Design, Art, City, Society for many years, I think till 2023, member of the Creation, Innovation and Urban Transformation Group at the University of Barcelona, and many other substantial activities. And Anthony will speak under the title, the letters are so small, The Suburb That Wished to Be City, Bon Pastor neighborhood in Barcelona. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you in this conference. Then my presentation, the title of my presentation is the title of a book we are preparing right now. that is la periferia que quiso ser ciudad. But what is important is urban transformation and social and urban transformation in the neighborhood of Bon Pastor. Okay, that is written by an neighborhood activist that is Salvador Angosto, and my mission in this book was the edition of the whole material. Bon Pastor is a neighborhood in the area of Barcelona that is a periphery till now. During years has been a periphery, and where many people from the different immigrants waves that came to Barcelona were going to live there. For example, since 1999, that is a graphic by an artist in Spain that is Opiso, relating to the problem of the dwellings. There was no possibility in the 1919 to hire a dwelling in Barcelona. Then Barcelona started to spread around in order to solve this problem. Then it's not necessary to read all that. What is important is that laws are very important in order to organize the territories. For example, here I show the first cheap houses. Cheap houses is a literal translation of casas baratas. Okay, that is a terrible word. Casas baratas, you imagine something wrong. But if you go to Madrid and you visit El Viso, that is a neighborhood of casas baratas, is the more expensive neighborhood in Madrid. And the old casas baratas of the 30s cost around 1 million euros. Okay? Well, there are several laws that are related to the provision of dwellings for people. Okay? And here you can see some of the kinds of casas or cheap houses that were built during the 20s and 30s. But what do you think about these images? If you see some of the images of Auschwitz are not quite far from those. There is a new kind of implementation of casas baratas that is municipal, like residential estates, long away from any part of Barcelona. There were 4 different states, and in the territory where we are working, there were 2, Bon Pastor and Baró de Viver. 1929. Okay. Then here you can see Barcelona. Bon Pastor is there. And one interesting thing right now in Bon Pastor is that almost 30% of the territory is industrial. That means that maybe this territory has a future. Okay. Okay, there are several transformations in the territory. The first one is because some of the big industries in Barcelona goes there. Second, goes inhabitants. But was a segregated territory. For example, that is, if somebody knows Barcelona, you will recognize the taxis of Barcelona. Okay? It's a kind of joke. The client, please, to Bon Pastor. The driver, to Bon Pastor. no way. If I go into Bon Pastor, I don't know if I will never come out again. That is an image of the situation of this state during years and years and years. A second major transformation starts in the 50s, 60s with different laws and interventions, but especially because what we call the social emergency plan in Barcelona. There is another one too in Madrid in 1 year before. Barcelona is 1959, with the construction, there you can see, of 756 new homes. And it's the moment to on the part of authorities to rethink what to do with the old estates. And here is a transformation plan from the small houses to block houses. That is a plan of 1968, that has been there during years and years. It was a kind of sword painting on the inhabitants. Here you can see quickly the transformation of the territory. That is interesting. That is the industrial site. Okay? And this territory has some particularities. That is, since 1929 till more or less 1974, it is controlled by the Catholic Church, doing things. The only things that remains of all this activity is a private school and a church. Nothing else. In 1974 are the neighbors that start to command the processes of transformation of their environment. And here I would like to introduce, in order to answer to the question, the difference between actors and agents. I follow the proposal of Horacio Capel, that is a full professor in geography. Actors are the people that participate in something. And the second important thing to see here are several struggles, reclamations, fights of the neighbors, and there, in red, you can see the time they spend to get this reclamation. Some of them 30 years, some others 43, 36. Then interventions here are peanuts. How you maintain the tension in order to achieve the objectives is through the neighbors' organizations. Yeah, since 2000, there are several regional projects that affect to the territory. And right now, as a synthesis, this territory has different small parts, okay? Then there is one part that was built in 2001, 2002, that the average income of the families in this part of the territory is about the average income in Barcelona. But all the rest of the parts of the territory, the average income is below the average income in Barcelona. What does it mean? It means that Bon Pastor is a territory that has to be controlled by authorities in order to solve inequalities and so on. Okay? You can see that here. The green is the rich part, and the rest are on this amount of euros of income. Then agents are the people or the institutions that can really transform. That is different from actors. Okay? But here you can see that is a neighborhood association. Okay? You can see that from one moment the neighborhood association changed its status from actor to agent in some of the last developments being developed in the neighborhood. And that means that maybe we have to start to think in some kind of co-productions going to co-governance, okay? And here we show just some images. That is the new part of the Bon Pastor. Okay? That are public art activities, that are what I talked to you yesterday. And finally, one of the most important things right now is the creation, through different participation processes in the territory, of an archive and research center for studying and developing activities in Baró de Viver and Bon Pastor, the two states. And that's new, 15 days ago. Is a municipal facility from the Museum of History of the City that is in Bon Pastor, showing, you will see, how were the small houses where those people lived during years. Then, who are the actors and who are the agents? That is a recent mural in Barcelona. You can see different fishes, and you can add other fishes. And thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk. Again, I don't know the place. I liked your distinction between actors and agents, and now actors can become agents. I mean, have a more substantial ability to change realities. And how do you define it? I also want, for me, it is, you gave a lot of tables with the background of on the evolution of Barcelona. What are we seeing here? We are seeing neighborhood, quite old suburban neighborhood, poor neighborhood, that apparently is going upwards. Is it equalization? Is it more gentrification because all of Barcelona is because the real estate is very hot? How the broader context of governance change and the city economy, the real estate market, what does it mean, you know, in the broader sense, in terms of the topics that we are speaking about in this conference?
Okay, first, about gentrification. From my point of view, there are two kinds of gentrification processes. One that is normal, natural in the city, and that is not new, is historic. And the other one is the processes that are happening right now, that links with the change of the economic base of the city. And the arrival of what can be called urban or technological nomads that comes to a city and many things happen. Tenements starts to be more expensive. The local historical retail disappear and appears another one. And there is a big pressure in residential aspects. That is a problem I think most of the cities have in this moment. I said that Bon Pastor has a possibility of future that is the industrial estate. And right now there are policies from the city of Barcelona in order to transform this industrial estate in a 4.0 industrial activity. We'll see. Because all that is quite new.
Okay, yeah, I'm very well aware of processes that happen currently in, for example, the city of Lisbon. I expect that these processes happened much earlier in Barcelona, when becoming a global city, sort of pushes aside the original, the locals, and it has its economic benefits, but it creates new pressures. We are in Lisbon, there are many immigrants also from Israel, so it's quite close to us. Barcelona less, only as tourists, we are there. So,
what is true is that since the last maybe 15 years, Barcelona is more unequal.
Unequal, yeah. Okay, let's open the floor for questions, comments.
So first of all, thank you. This presentation was really interesting. The slide that you had about co-governance, I would like to understand more about that. If you could maybe tell us more about that.
The last slide was just in order to put on the table something to discuss among us in order to answer to the question who owns the city. Then what is clear is that there are different approaches in order to make more participative and allow that citizens could get the status of agents that are developed all over Europe, mainly, for example, in the United Kingdom, and they use the 4 stars co. But the terms that appear in this star are confusing. For example, for us, co-design is not the same that is for an economist. And then what the idea is to pass from this idea of co-production to the idea of co-governance. That means that people, citizens, can be agents in the processes of transformation of the city, not just actors. How to do that? That's another fork. I don't know exactly how to do that.
So if I may ask a follow-up question to that, it seems like the process that you're describing in Bon Pastor is that players are becoming agents, or the people are becoming more involved in the governance of their neighborhood, and that's a positive thing. Are you optimistic as to this becoming a wider spread thing, like both in that neighborhood and in other places in Barcelona?
That will depend a lot on the power of the neighborhood associations. And there is a important risk that is the presence in all these processes of lobby groups. For example, when I talk of lobby groups, I talk of the lobby of the bicycles and things like that. Okay? That, why I say that? Because neighbors think from the territory. The lobbies think from the point of view of an ideal city. And here is a contradiction that is very difficult to manage. And the other important factor is the will of the political will in order to promote this kind of transformation processes.
Please.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I think we learned a lot. You mentioned some processes that are initiated or executed by the authorities, and others that are on a neighborhood level initiated by people. Can you give your impression of how differently these two things work in terms of effectiveness, how they're perceived by people that actually live in the neighborhood? And yeah.
Well, the big problem is aging. Neighborhood associations in Barcelona are people that form part of neighborhood associations are older, like me, for example. And it's very difficult to attract young people. You can understand the way they live is completely different from the way people lived years ago. They have their interest all around, and it's very, very difficult to attract young people. That is the possibility of continuity of this process, transforming actors into agents and modeling a new kind of governance in the city. If it's not possible to attract young people, then will be the lobby groups that will run the city. And that is a real problem.
Thank you.
Couple of things. Since the 98, there is a Catalan law about neighborhoods that need improvement. And then the city of Barcelona developed another project with their own funds that is called Pla de Barris, neighborhood plan, in order to help these more poor areas to improve their quality of living. Yeah, that is the more important. For example, this museum that is a city facility in a peripheral neighborhood was funded by the Pla de Barris. Then there are many activities, and the other that is very important. An important part of the transformation in Bon Pastor was possible because the site of the Casas Baratas was property of the city council. And I think that is an important issue.
Okay, so I would like to thank you, Anthony, again. Thank you. And we will now move to our third and final presenter, Nir Barak, a faculty member at the Department of Politics and Government at the Ben Gurion University in Beersheba, deals with urban politics, environmental politics, political theory. He received his PhD here at the Hebrew University and was afterwards a Fulbright postdoctoral fellow at Columbia University, also later on at the Technion. I understand that your talk will be based on research done with Guy Ben-Porat.
It's true.
Guy Ben-Porat, also a professor at the Department of Politics and Government at the Ben-Gurion University. Guy has recently published, co-authored a book on policing citizens. I noticed here that at 2013, Guy Ben-Porat published a book, Between State and Synagogue, the secularization of contemporary Israel. I wonder if this is still a correct title for 2023, but this is only a sideline on the sides. So Nir will speak today on secure citizens, policing, safety, and citizenship. Okay, please.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here with friends and colleagues and new friends. And thank you very much, Katya, Tim, and Michal for the invitation. And thank you, Nofit and Dani, for the ongoing organization. Katya asked us to go wild and to present work in progress, imagined projects, etc. So I'm going for a work in progress, which is really in progress, and I want to outline the core components of a new research project with Guy Ben-Porat, my colleague, who unfortunately is teaching at the moment. It's found at the intersection of urban studies, citizenship studies, and policing studies. So the story goes as follows. Global metropolitan cities, global cities by and large, are often celebrated as open, liberal, and tolerant to others, right? That's the ideal. Able to accomplish a more inclusive form of citizenship at the city level, or a citizenship, as Avner terms it, and I follow, denoting a sphere of citizenship that is distinct from national citizenship. However, while being very exciting and supportive of these theoretical and empirical developments, these celebratory tones are tempered by their dissenting oppositions. Simply put, while cities can be open and inclusive, they also display different hierarchies contingent upon class, ethnicity, gender, race, and patterns of exclusion and geographical segregations, thereby suggesting political fragmentations of citizenship. So one question that emerges is whether cities indeed offer new possibilities for inclusive membership and political participation, or do they replicate the traditional hierarchies of state-based citizenship? In this conceptual paper, in the conceptual underpinnings of this project, we draw some ideas and insights. And regarding or corresponding with the conference's overarching themes, who owns the city, we want to argue, or we assume, that citizenship and citizens' ability to exercise the right to the city is preconditioned, among other things, by personal security, manifest in the capacity to move freely and safely throughout the cityscape. I think Tafik, that was the chair of the previous session, said it beautifully. The right identity in the wrong city, or the wrong identity in the right city, I think is an interesting way to look at fragmentation. So this is the big question, the interrelationship between citizenship, right? Citizenship at the city level, security and freedom, perceptions of policing, and the presentation will outline each of these factors. I'll then try to say something about the three of them together, and I will shortly remark about the research design of the ongoing project. As mentioned, this is work in progress. I'm very much looking for your, to your comments, as this is still open. We start with citizenship. The notion of the rescaling of citizenship. Here we take inspiration from Saskia Sassen, Manuel Castells, Rainer Baubock, Ishai Blank, Daniel Belen, De Shalit, basically saying that if we previously thought about the city as a subunit of the state that functions as a socioeconomic node, contemporarily it would be more accurate to think about the city as a semi-autonomous political entity. And as such, we can think about cities not only as about residents in the city, but as a different sphere of citizenship. As a form of citizenship, its membership patterns are based on residence, and the ideal is of inclusive and egalitarian membership. as we just heard from Avner, questions of social attachment, sense of place, sense of belonging are important factors to the well-being and functioning of citizens. The factor of participation, well embedded in the notion of the right to the city, emphasizes the right to participate in appropriate urban space and to promote use over exchange values, with research often emphasizing a more efficacious and empowered form of participation. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because a unique feature, I think, of citizenship in comparison with other types of citizenship is that is not necessarily its legal setting, maybe in addition to the importance of its legal settings, is its anchoring in the physical public realm. We may distinguish between public spaces, sidewalks, markets, plazas, where they are places of congregation of people unknown to each other, and parochial spaces such as playgrounds, synagogues, churches, etc., where people who are acquainted come together, or street festivals, if we wish. And in these spaces, in the public realm, is where quotidian social and political life is proclaimed. These public spaces are where people pass on a weekly or even daily basis and where people debate shared concerns. It's where civic expectations from politics are deliberated, where differences between social groups are resolved, or at least disputed, and where civic relations are formed. By extension, what is the city but the people? It may be said that it is in cities' public spaces where citizenship is produced and reproduced. Moving on. The centrality of the public realm highlights two crucial tenets for meaningful egalitarian citizenship, meaning inclusionary, non-discriminatory membership in the city's political community. The first tenet is citizens' sense of personal and group safety in the city's public realm. It's a basic right and expectation, and I'm not sure it's included in the right to the city. It's more of a conceptual question. We can talk about this later, but basically we can say that the basic expectation is that citizens will not be harmed in public, whether the harm comes from other individuals, looters and gangs, discriminatory and illegitimate use of police enforcement measure, or vigilante groups. The second tenet of citizenship is the capacity to move freely throughout the city. While freedom of movement is de jure unrestricted, the degrees of safety and freedom to walk throughout the cityscape is limited de facto, right? Being the right identity in the wrong city or the wrong identity in the right neighborhood? No. Being in the wrong identity in a specific neighborhood. And these are structured mainly by formal and informal policing mechanisms. We can talk about over and under policing in a minute, street lights, surveillance cameras, urban design, and whatever. And both these aspects lead us to the discussion on the variable of policing. First, from a typical state-centric approach. In diverse societies, marked by racial and class divisions and differential citizenship, the rule of law, social order, security in general are inevitably contested concepts. Now, as a political scientist, not a criminologist, for example, policing is a way to look at politics from a very interesting angle. By and large, I think that would be too controversial to say that political science doesn't pay too much attention to policing, which is quite surprising given how important it is in everyday life. You disagree? Okay, let's discuss this. Anyway, but when we do discuss policing, it's often through these shocking incidents of police violence, recorded violence, counter-violence, etc. But everyday life events, these banal happenings in which officers arrest people or stop them on the street, might be no less significant to those than those shocking events. Going back to Weber, the legitimate monopoly over state violence, policing is the arm of the state that enforces this violence. So by making sense of policing, we can make sense of citizenship. Encounters with the police act as civic lessons for citizens about the fundamental properties and commitments of their governments, political standing and equal membership. It allows citizens to evaluate how people like them are treated with respect or with stigma in comparison to other citizens. Similarly, the absence of policing can signal neglect and disregard of a particular social group, often correlating with gender, ethnicity, race, class, and in the Israeli case, nationality, of course. In the words of the political sociologist Peter Waddington, it is the police that demarcates and patrol the boundaries of citizenship. So some citizens can feel that they are protected because they are worthy and deserving, others can feel neglected and do not deserve protections, and others can feel that they are depicted as security threats. And all this takes us to the notion of perceptions of policing. Over-policing is an aggressive approach that singles out minorities, especially visible minorities, depicted as a threat and subjected to negative attention. Some citizens might believe, often for good reasons, that the police is targeting them, that they are being racially profiled, the force is being used excessively, more than against other groups. The other category is under-policing. While some groups might feel that they're neglected, that police does not provide them with services, does not protect them, and they often do this in comparison with others. So the fact that my neighborhood, for example, is not safe and I can't walk freely in my neighborhood is because the police doesn't care enough and doesn't make it safe for people like me. Trying to connect the dots. Policing as a lesson in citizenship and not just about citizenship hierarchies in general. A central assumption of urban political theory is that thinking like a city is different from thinking like a state, implying that we cannot simply graft theories of policing and citizenship onto the city and its citizenship. It's not the same unit of analysis, not the same social and political attributes, and it requires a different type of thinking. When we think about policing in the city, or at least security in the city, we think about eyes on the street as a means of social control, broken windows as a sign of neglect, declining sense of safety or a hotbed for crime, neighborhood effects going back to the Chicago School up to research emphasizing social attachment, sense of place as important factor contributing to well-being and functioning of citizens. And of course, geographic segregations in different neighborhoods. This is a map from Tel Aviv. This is not our data. This is a Tel Aviv research unit showing basically sense of safety. Green means a higher percentage of people feeling safe in their neighborhoods. Southern neighborhoods feel less safe. This is all well and known. But the question is not only about the physical segregation. The question is who feels safe, how, when, why, and where. I mean, if we look at these places of a lack of safety, do all the people in these neighborhoods feel unsafe? And if I live in this neighborhood, for example, can I move freely up to the northern neighborhoods without being arrested by the police, being stopped, being interrogated, etc.? If this ability is lacking, maybe it doesn't make any sense to talk about, a unitary form of egalitarian citizenship, but rather highlights the inner hierarchies of citizenship. And the interesting question is, okay, here it is. And the interesting question is, does it really constitute? I mean, will we see, when we look at this empirically, different hierarchies formed at the city level in comparison with the state, and will different cities, again, according to theories of intrinsic logic of the city, spirit of city, urban ethos, etc., will we see different fragmentations and different hierarchies in different cities? So this is where our empirical aspect of this. No, I have one more thing to say about this before I move on. What I want to say is that what we want to argue is that policing and perceptions of policing serve as a proxy for assessing the degree of cohesion in hierarchies of citizenship in its celebratory promises, openness and tolerance, and their dissenting opposition. The impact of policing practices and how it produces inclusive or exclusive membership patterns are often studied and analyzed at the national sphere of citizenship. However, while various research projects in these fields have been conducted in cities, the city is taken mainly as a stage, following the previous discussion about this, and where national citizenship plays out. Moreover, I want to say that current scholarship possibly overlooks that policing practices act as a lesson in national citizenship while failing to assess their effects on citizenship, if indeed there is such a distinct sphere of citizenship. So, a new path for studying the intersection of policing, citizenship, and citizenship opens by decentering national citizenship, replacing it with the city and its citizenship patterns as a meaningful polity. Operatively, it means assessing the interrelations between perceptions of policing, sense of personal safety and citizenship among different social groups and different neighborhoods and cities, and may shed light on citizenship hierarchies and whether they replicate the traditional hierarchies of state-based citizenship. Now, we are conducting this project in Israel because, for many practical reasons, this is where we live and work, and also we are quite motivated by the horrific events of May 2021 in Israel. In the Israeli mixed cities, we're talking about civic violence mostly between Jews and Arabs in these cities. We do not focus on the cities where the most horrific violence took place, which were Lydia, the city of Lod, Lydia, but rather on the global cities, the more metropolitan cities, the more can I say substantive cities where we might have these expectations for, these cities to be more open, liberal, and tolerant. So we have Haifa, Tel Aviv, and Jerusalem. And in each city, we picked three or four neighborhoods which share some affinities based on their social demographic characteristics and about their urban typology, residence, city center, etc. And the cities are also very different from each other, which follows the theory and the practice in this field. And what we want to do is to compare or assess these variables following four working assumptions or hypotheses. So the first is that perceptions of safety and freedom of movement vary between groups contingent upon gender, race, ethnic background, and socioeconomic class. Trivial, but it's important to place it. It has two sub-assumptions that ethnic groups, particularly visible minorities, are concerned with over-policing, limiting their freedom to move outside their neighborhoods. I mean, while I may be safe or feel secure in my own neighborhood, when I go to the northern neighborhoods, to the Jewish neighborhoods, to the Arab neighborhoods, whatever your social identity is, I may not feel safe anymore, thereby limiting de facto my freedom of movement. Under-policing and declining sense of safety in the public sphere can affect all groups, though in different ways. While stronger social groups and elites and economically affluent may succeed in demanding more policing or use private police services, minority groups are more vulnerable to neglect and crime. Additionally, gender differences impact sense of safety in the public sphere as resulting from under-policing, sometimes. Second assumption is that different social groups have contradictory expectation from policing vis-a-vis sense of safety and the capacity to move freely throughout the city. Simply put, one's group's sense of safety is often at the expense of another group's sense of belonging and freedom of movement. Consequently, while for some groups, the strong, the affluent, the main concern is police effectiveness. For the other groups, let's just call them the weaker groups, it's about police fairness. What's going on here? The third hypothesis, respective of the two others, the distinction between different patterns of citizenship and national citizenship do not necessarily imply a common citizenship throughout the cityscape. First, ethnicity, class, and gender shape experiences and perceptions of citizenship. And second, particular neighborhood characteristics are a source of urban authenticity, if I think about Sharon Zukin, place-based attachments, social attachments, etc. Therefore, our assumption is, or hypothesis is that membership patterns of citizenship are fragmented along identities and neighborhoods. Okay, and we want to juxtapose the two. Okay, not only neighborhoods, not only social identities throughout the city, but rather social identities and neighborhoods, and to assess which has more effect or how do they intersect, would be a more correct way to say this. So again, this is the map in Tel Aviv. The fact that here we have lower sense of safety doesn't imply that all groups share this lower sense of safety. This is based on data from Jerusalem municipality, causes for declining sense of safety. These are three neighborhoods: Rehavia, Givat Tzarfatit, which is just around the corner, and Beit Vagan, which is an Orthodox neighborhood. Eran, don't worry, I'll finish on time. We can see that they don't share the same concerns, that they are experiencing different safety harms, or should I say, and this is where the inner city comparisons between neighborhoods becomes interesting. But we also want to compare cities to each other. This is a graph based on the Central Bureau of Statistics survey about personal safety. We can see that more or less Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa all share a very high sense of personal safety, during the nighttime. We don't see a big difference or distribution, and fear of violence, induced harm, is more or less the same in all these three cities. But one way to interpret this is that, okay, we don't have any city differences, that this is more or less, that this is maybe the baseline for Israeli citizenship by and large.
Isn't Beersheba missing?
Beersheba is not part of our research at the moment. It's something that we are debating between ourselves, and maybe we should...
Especially in the case of personal safety.
Of course.
You should talk to people from the University of Beersheba.
Let's not go into the politics of that. But yes, Beersheba is missing, and we'll probably add it. I don't know at which stage. But what I want to say is that a different take on this, or maybe what we hope to find, is that while we look at this, looking at the overall picture might entail similarities, the interesting question is whether all groups share this very high and high, whether citizenship is fragmented along the same lines, or whether Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Jaffa, and Haifa form different hierarchies of citizenship, distinct from each other and distinct from national citizenship. I think that we have good reasons to believe that it will fragment differently. Especially, we have very high expectations from Haifa regarding Jews. We do regarding Jews and Arabs, but these are all working assumptions. This is why we need this research to go on. We're now at the midst of conducting a wide quantitative survey, which will be followed by qualitative interviews, focus groups, inner city comparisons, in focus groups, and comprehensive comparative studies. And I hope that in the next time we meet, I'll be able to say something more empirically based about perceptions of security and insecurity, and the political and normative implications of this outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
More or less on time.
Yeah, or your time, it's fine. We have time. We are on time. So, first I would say that in the broadest term, it comes to me that there is a contradiction here. We speak about the right to the city, the freedom for all to move everywhere safely. But when we add the word safely, some freedom is essentially lost. First of all comes surveillance. We know about that, and it can become it's everywhere, and it can be quite tough, and perhaps it's worse. The limitation of our physical limitations of freedom is the constant surveillance over our movements. Then when we need policing, there will be some profiling. It may be the African Americans in American cities, it may be Arabs here. In the Playmobil games of my grandson, it's usually the unshaved who are the criminal. And where would we like to be? Dubai is safe, is very safe. But it's not an exemplary the right to the city place. A lot of privatized spaces. Indianapolis, one of the ways to make it safe is the father of my son was a sheriff. They used to go with their police cars, collect the homeless, and give them options. Either you go to the detention for some time, unpleasant, or one-way ticket to San Francisco. In San Francisco, they are allowed to stay, but then there are problems of safety and unpleasant. So again, I won't go further, but there is this contradiction between the right and to the city and safety when it concerns police. We did not speak about what's going on now, not in Beersheba, but in the Arab towns of Israel. So let's open it for questions. Nufar, you will the first.
Neil, thanks for a great presentation, as always. I was wondering if you could make more explicit the connection between urban citizenship and safety, because to me, urban citizenship is also, it entails a kind of taking an active stand, not just living in the city, so being active and not necessarily passive, whereas safety is not necessarily kind of an active concept. I don't know if it's clear. So how are you using the concept, more than just people living in the city? How do you relate it to the more active aspect of it? And I think it kind of relates to Eran's question.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great project. And it's great because I see 100,000 connections with stuff that we recently started doing in Berlin. So it's one of those moments where you think, oh, yes, now I understand why I'm here. I see all these things. And not that the rest was not good, but, the sort of... I didn't mean it that way. But sorry about that. And my question is the following, because I understand the pragmatic use of safety statistics, right? And I would like to learn more, but maybe that's for later, about how they're constructed. Because if you ask people, does it bother you, blah, 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 there's a lot of safety projects that do it that way. They give people the items. How important is vandalism in your neighborhood? How important is that and that and that? You get a very different result than if you do it the other way around. If you ask people, how do you rate the safety and why do you give this grade? So I wondered about what is the conceptual or the methodological tool behind the statistics you showed. But if that's boring for everybody else, the other question I had was, I like this idea of the use of the city and that everybody should go everywhere very much. And I wondered if you thought about including the digital representation about what happens in cities in your work. Because it seems to me that a lot of when people say, I don't go to that neighborhood because it's unsafe, it's not because they actually went there and something happened, it's because they hear things. And it seems to me that in the city of Berlin, it becomes more and more important to use about the segregated use of public space by people not going to certain areas because they've heard that stuff happens there, and they've actually seen, and here's where the policing comes in, because the police posts on Twitter what they do. So you can read quite easily in very new ways what happens to the city in terms of policing, and areas where the police goes a lot are areas where a lot happens, otherwise the police wouldn't go there, because if you're white and middle class, you think that the police only comes when something's really bad. So I wondered about not just where do people, I like your point about people saying, I don't go to a certain area because I will be over-policed, but I was also wondering about the effect of well-resourced people not going to certain parts of the city anymore and the sort of seclusion effect that has on the use of public space, on integration and democracy and all these kind of things.
Maybe we take a third question and then first round.
So thank you, really interesting. I was also wondering about your conception of citizenship, but whether you mean only active citizenship or also perhaps passive citizenship in the sense of rights holders, and then you go and talk passive citizenship, rights holders, and then this notion of citizenship ties well, I think, better to your focus on the policing. The other point I was thinking about is that, your entire description is very much related to the notion of otherness, right? So whether you feel otherness in particular parts of the city and what this otherness does, because I think that even people from the northern part of Tel Aviv, if they go to the southern part of Tel Aviv, their otherness will impact upon their sense of safety in the same way as people from the south part of Tel Aviv will go to the north part of Tel Aviv. And here I'm wondering a bit more about the construction of otherness that I personally feel like in the past 3 months, right? That some people who were the others of others, the roles changed. Now policing is against the protesters, in the city of Tel Aviv, as opposed to protection that is given perhaps to people who are in favor of the reform. We feel different attitudes of policing towards, so there's these new constructions of otherness that are related to political activities, to the government. I don't know. But this is something that is changing even within cities. I personally have that feeling in the past 3 months of policing against the protesters now. So how do you address that?
The connection between citizenship and safety, and this addresses both Nufar and Einat's question. Okay, so we're looking at it both at right holders, the passive aspect and the active aspect of actually working with the municipality, neighborhood councils, etc., trying to promote more safety in the neighborhood, sharing concerns, etc. And we want to assess whether citizens feel efficacious. I mean, is this effective when we raise a concern of some sort? Is there even, and if it is, who do you expect to address this? Is it the police itself? Is it the city center that addresses this? Will you contact city council directly? I mean, how will you practice your active citizenship is what interests us vis-a-vis safety in this regard. But the starting point does look at the passive aspect of political membership in virtue of residence, which I think is in line with the theory, looking at Ishai here at this point. Talia, about the statistics. What I showed is not our statistics. Our survey is running at the moment. We're doing it face-to-face. I mean, not online interviews or phone interviews, but face-to-face at the neighborhoods themselves. And then we will complement the quantitative with qualitative interviews. The quantitative are more focused, asking the exact for the type of questions that you mentioned. What impacts your sense of safety? Lack of street lights, What are your safety concerns? Vandalism, theft, robbery, etc. This is for the quantitative survey. In the qualitative survey, we hope to go deeper and ask it from the inverse perspective, what might increase your sense of safety, etc. Because I think it's the latter kind of question can be answered better qualitatively, and the former can be answered better quantitatively, and we want to make good use of both methods. Okay. I just want to throw in this. I want to throw in the answer to Einat's question about otherness. So one of the questions that we ask concerns directly the notion of belonging, which is also one of our factors, measures, variables. And we asked it through questions of alienation. I don't go to the other neighborhood because of sense of alienation. I don't belong here because of whatever reason. So in the quantitative survey, we can highlight senses of alienation. In the qualitative, we can ask what causes this sense of alienation. Now, I should say that research about policing and citizenship is always challenging, especially at these times, because of all the turbulent events that are going on and those that will probably keep going on. At the same time, this is the best time to conduct this kind of research because many things now come up. Last point regarding Talia's question about digital representations. For each neighborhood, we're building a profile which is based on statistical data, digital representations, and we hope to have a comprehensive profile of each neighborhood as it comes up. First, statistically, municipal data, etc., and via Facebook, Twitter, etc. But we're doing this very manually. Which I'm not sure is the best method to do it, but this is what we know at the moment.
So we'll take some more, you, and then there are several. Start.
Thank you very much, Nir. It's a very interesting presentation. I wanted to suggest another dimension you might want to relate to. When you showed us the data of how people feel in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa, I was really surprised that people in Jerusalem feel as safe as in other cities. And then I thought, why is it so? Because if you ask someone where it would be safer, in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv, Haifa, of course not in Jerusalem. But then I thought, but I live in Jerusalem all my life in Israel, and I feel safe. So maybe another factor that plays a role here is your baseline. So where you live, what you are used to. So it might be useful to ask the same people you interview, how do you think you would feel in another city, in the two others that you are researching. Of course, it might be, as Talia said, that people demonize cities they don't live in. People tell me things about Jerusalem I've never experienced. But it's still interesting to see.
I can say that the Filipino caregiver of my parents, he says that they like much better to live in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv. Jerusalem is much safer than Tel Aviv because their residents, most of the time they are with their clients, but their residence in Tel Aviv is in very unpleasant areas. And Jerusalem, you don't go to the refugee camp of Jafat. Okay, starts you.
I was wondering if you're looking into how perceived danger and real danger overlap, because I've personally felt very safe in places where people have told me not to go, and I've been to places with friends where they were scared, and I thought there was no reason to be scared.
So now.
Hi, thanks. Sonia, I want to press you on the larger project that you and Avner are pursuing, which is the urbanization of basic political concepts. So you're now dealing with the concept of safety or with security. Speaking of which,
you can continue.
And I think it goes back perhaps to Talia's question, which is about the parameters of what counts as safety in an urban setting versus in a national setting. And maybe, and again, I don't know exactly what you asked and what were the parameters, but they might be also not just as Katya perhaps, hypothesized that it's about the baseline, but also what do you compare? So, do people in Jerusalem, for example, or when people are asked about Jerusalem, you would have more of the national conflict, but less actually of missiles. There have never been missiles shot, launched at Jerusalem. We know why, etc. Or maybe once, right? Except but generally speaking, while Tel Aviv has more of those, more of the buses, so it has a lot to do with not just the digital representation, but also with a lot of traumas, etc. Even though the last bus that bombed in Tel Aviv was really, really long time ago. And again, if you seek a notion of safety which is urban, then I'm wondering whether you are also looking for something which is distinct from the national one. And then you can think: is it more direct, or maybe more mediated through various either electronic media, or I would actually hypothesize that it has to do more with like in person. Someone told me, which maybe. Okay, so that would be interesting, right? Is it about choice? So I chose to be here, I could move, I could exit, and then the element of choice would also influence somehow how people experience their own safety or lack of proximity to places. So it's just about that. I mean, is it the same concept that you would look for a general national safety, or there's something urban or local about that?
So maybe following up, and I also think there's like a very strong connection between what Avner was talking about and what Nir is talking about. And I think one hint is in the graph that you showed about Rehavia, Givat Tzarfatit, and Beit Vagan, which I think shows very clearly that the neighborhood that is more diverse is where safety issues start popping up. And that goes back to what Avner was pursuing, right? That the more diverse, like the city, one of the main features of what differentiates a suburb from a city is diversity. And with diversity come all these other features or challenges or whatever. So I think this is probably the linchpin that you need to somehow.
Take one more question.
Thank you. So, Naomi. So, first of all, as a native Tel Avivi, I am very excited about what you just presented. I think it's awesome. But also, I was wondering whether you address in some way the difference or the space between praxis and feelings, because, for example, the fact that I do or do not feel safe in a certain space does not mean that I'll necessarily refrain from going there. So like behavior changes on certain levels and feelings change on other levels, and I was wondering how you approach that in your research, because this is a very nuanced thing in my opinion and in my experience.
Okay. To give some responses, and then maybe we'll have a few minutes for the remaining questions.
Between the subjective and objective measures of safety, which I think is comes up in many of the questions, we're focused on the subjective measures because we think that this is what really counts. Objective, I mean, if we were to study the police itself, then we might rates of crime, what actually goes on, what has been reported, etc., would have been important. But what we are aiming to do is to analyze fragmentations of citizenship through the prism of policing. Therefore, the only thing that really matters, and I think it answers also Naomi's question, is the subjective measures. And we know that many times they are highly disconnected. That because of stigma, because of false perceptions, because of general panic in society, there's a beautiful Hebrew term for this called shiturism. It's like the equivalent of police about militarization. Termed by Irela Shadmi, for those interested. It means that no matter what happens, we want more police. Despite the fact that the police knows that there are low rates of crime in comparison to other neighborhoods, comparison to other cities, etc., we feel unsafe. We want more police here and now, despite the fact that we all know that more policing will not necessarily solve the problem. Maybe what we need is really more welfare, more of the types of things that Joe and Avner are talking about in the city. So we're focusing on the subjective measures, and at the moment we do not plan to juxtapose this vis-a-vis the real police data on the crime, etc., and what goes on. I think this does this also. I think it also. Yes. Yeah. So yeah. So policing is the prism through which we want to look at citizenship. Yishai, the question that you asked about the urbanization of security, and is it a different concept from national security, etc. I don't know. It's one of the things that I think we will only be able to answer after we have some results and after we have conducted this. And this is actually what my main motivation all this is. I'm not sure that what constitutes lack of security is really different from the national level or the city level. But again, the main focus is the fragmentation of citizenship at the national and city level, and I think that it's not too wild to assume that I can say as I don't know, I don't want to choose any social group because it will always be wrong. As a certain person, as a person of a certain type, I feel generally unsafe in the state of Israel because I am an Arab, right? A Palestinian citizen of Israel. But in my own city, or specifically in my own neighborhood, I do feel safe enough. And this is where I think the different spheres of citizenship play out, and this is where security is the prism through which we can assess this. Yeah, please do.
I would say that here it's not just about the identity, but also about the ability to influence. So, and this has to do with, you know, local policing and various elements of you know, what was termed in the literature departicipation often. Yeah. So I wouldn't just cling to the identity part, but also to the active citizenship part that also came in the questions.
About neighborhood diversity, Michal, it's a great point, and I think that I don't know how to address this at the moment, and I'm not sure. I mean, if we think about this through the prism of nationality, I think that it's, of course, more diverse, mixed neighborhoods, declining sense of safety. But there are other measures of diversity, right? Religious diversity, class diversity, ethnic diversity, etc., which might play out differently. So I don't know. I agree with the general intuition, but I'll be able to. Yeah, okay.
The question is whether you can assess these things on a city level or it's actually on a more local level. So both, you know, all these cities are large cities, which is why you chose them, but they're actually very different within them. So different neighborhoods act very differently. Yeah. So, you know, how are you going to address all of that?
I'll take the risk of using an ecological metaphor and say that maybe we can think about the city as, you know, as an ecosystem of neighborhoods where you know, we do have certain levels of homogenization at the neighborhood level and diversity at the city level. I don't know how it plays out theoretically vis-a-vis sense of safety, etc., but it might be a way to hold this rope from both ends. But I don't have any intelligent answer to this question at the moment.
There was one question there, and maybe a quick one here. Not sure we'll have time for a third one. Please.
I actually don't know if this is relevant, but going back to the nationality aspect, I think there's a huge difference between police in Jerusalem, police in Haifa, and police in Tel Aviv. I think police in Jerusalem is like kind of like it's usually even the officers are paid more. There's the in Hebrew tamritzim level for them to come to Jerusalem. I think all these things have to be taken into aspect when also like the policing is, I know you're looking at it from the prism of the police, but that should also be taken into consideration because I also think that, as you said, the welfare aspects are also very different. I think why in Haifa it's very different. People also have a beach, more people have more places to go out, maybe than Jerusalem. The transportation for Arab communities in Jerusalem, considering to Jewish areas, and that aspect from Haifa. I hope I did put something to Tala.
Yeah, really quickly on that diversity argument. I think you can show we can show statistically for Berlin that the diversity itself is not the problem. It's the absence of functional diversity. So if you have no, in the Jane Jacobs sense, if you have no diverse infrastructure and you have a high diversity in residents, then you have a lower safety perception. If you have a high diversity in the functional diversity and you have a high diversity in the residents, you're fine. And we can show statistically that what influences, it's not a direct correlation. The correlation goes through the question, do you ever talk to people that you don't know from someplace else in the street? And do you ever encounter people that you know from someplace else when you're outside? This presumes functional diversity. Functional diversity then is able to sort of reduce the effect of fears and all these kind of things. I won't talk about that tomorrow.
Okay, so final word.
Jerusalem is the most challenging city, I think, for all the obvious reasons, and that's why we're leaving it for last. There are many types of policing going on in Jerusalem, right? The ordinary police, the border police, of course, the military, many forms of street-level bureaucrats, which I think constitute different senses of over-policing and under-policing in different areas. I'll say that we have a methodological challenge that at the moment we don't know how to address East Jerusalem. We'll figure it out gradually, because we for sure will include at least one neighborhood from East Jerusalem. Otherwise, I don't think we will be able to capture what goes on in Jerusalem in a correct manner. But looking at this broadly again, and coming back to the question of nationality and urban citizenship, the urbanization of warfare in general, I think, is perplexing when it does go on in city centers, whether it's bombings, shootings, etc., what have you. All these horrible events that we're all experiencing in different places of throughout the world. Does it impact our national citizenship? Does it impact our urban citizenship? And if so, does it impact them in similar manners? I'm not sure. This is the region of questions that we want to address after we'll actually have data.
Okay, so תודה רבה. Thank you to our three speakers.